The first sound I heard that morning was not birds, not traffic, but the hollow clank of metal against wood, like someone trying to wrestle a stubborn flagpole out of the ground. I rolled out of bed faster than any alarm could have managed, tugged the blinds open, and there she was, Karen, queen of the HOA, in her housecoat and slippers, tugging violently on the aluminum antenna I had bolted beside my garage. Her arms strained like she was reenacting some Olympic shot-put event. The sight was so surreal I almost laughed, but then the hinge snapped and she toppled backward into my flower bed, antenna base still clutched like a trophy. And right then, before coffee, before rational thought, I knew this wasn't just another HOA squabble. This was going to explode. I didn't storm outside or shout. That would have been too easy, too emotional, and frankly too predictable. Instead, I picked up my phone and snapped a dozen pictures through the blind. Karen, scrambling upright, shaking dirt off her robe, muttering something about community standards and ugly monstrosities, had no idea she was on candid camera. The antenna hadn't been just for show. It was a high-band receiver I'd been using for work on a side project. Nothing illegal, but technical enough that the average suburban gossip wouldn't understand. And that was exactly why Karen hated it. She couldn't explain it, couldn't categorize it, and therefore wanted it gone. In her world, mystery equaled menace. When I finally walked outside, hands in pockets, voice calm, she spun toward me with the triumphant energy of someone who thinks she's just won. "Your ugly stick is down," she declared, waving it like a spear. "The neighborhood looks decent again. You're welcome." I tilted my head, pretending to admire her handiwork. "Karen, you just committed vandalism. On my property. While trespassing. Before breakfast. That's impressive efficiency." My tone dripped with sarcasm, but she was immune. She planted the antenna in my driveway like a war banner and huffed. "You should be thanking me," she said. "The HOA board voted. That thing violated Aesthetic Code Section 14, subsection C. Structures resembling telecommunications equipment are prohibited. I'm just enforcing the rules." I raised an eyebrow. "Strange, because I don't remember you being law enforcement, or utility, or in possession of any authority beyond passive-aggressive newsletters printed in Comic Sans." Her cheeks flushed. Karen's power came from intimidation and repetition, not logic. But she doubled down anyway. "I'll have you fined. You'll see. That contraption could be spying on people. For all we know, you're listening to our phone calls." The irony was delicious. She had literally ripped down a device designed for weather signal analysis and amateur radio, and now she was accusing me of espionage. I just smiled. "Spying? Karen, do you even know how antennas work?" She folded her arms. "I know ugly when I see it. And I know suspicious when I see it. If you won't comply, I'll escalate this." Escalate. She loved that word. It made her feel official, like she was one step away from wearing a badge. I let her storm back across the cul-de-sac, antenna dragging behind her like a medieval lance. The other neighbors peeked out from curtains, whispering, watching the drama unfold as if it were free cable. By the time I retreated inside, my phone buzzed with 3 texts from different residents, each with some variation of, "Did she really just tear that down? You better call the cops." But I didn't. Not yet. I played a longer game. Instead, I sent the photos to my attorney and sat down with coffee, savoring the chaos like a spectator at my own private circus. By noon, Karen had already circulated an HOA emergency bulletin. A single sheet of paper taped to every mailbox, written in her shrill handwriting masquerading as official notice. It warned that unauthorized surveillance equipment had been spotted and removed for the safety of residents. It instructed everyone to report any suspicious electronic devices immediately. And at the bottom, her signature, Karen, HOA President and Community Watch Chair. I chuckled reading it. Surveillance equipment. If only she knew what she'd actually dragged into her garage. The antenna was connected to a receiver box that stored data packets on encrypted drive. When she yanked it loose, she didn't just rip down a pole, she interrupted a live data logging session. That meant the system automatically logged the disconnect, sent error pings, and, most importantly, flagged an alert to the group I'd partnered with. A group far bigger than our HOA. They'd wanted field data for atmospheric testing. Now they'd see sudden tampering from a suburban backyard in Middle America. And they wouldn't be ignoring it. Around dinner time, Karen struck again. This time she marched up to my porch, antenna pieces under her arm, lips tight with self-righteousness. She didn't knock. She just dropped the bent aluminum onto my welcome mat and announced, "This junk is now evidence. If you replace it, I'll file an injunction. The board has spoken." I leaned casually against the doorframe. "Evidence of what?" "Your burglary skills." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't test me. I have friends who know people in law enforcement." The timing couldn't have been better. Because just then, down the street, a pair of dark SUVs rolled in, unmarked but unmistakable. Broad front grilles, tinted windows, antennas that ironically mirrored the one she'd just destroyed. Karen's bravado cracked for a fraction of a second as she turned to see them glide into our cul-de-sac like predators entering a pen. The neighbors froze on their lawns. Children's bikes abandoned mid-ride. Curtains twitched. The SUVs stopped directly in front of Karen's driveway. Out stepped two men in dark suits, badges flashing briefly in the golden dusk. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a dock. I folded my arms, savoring every heartbeat of the silence that followed. Finally one agent looked around, eyes scanning, then zeroed in on Karen clutching bent metal like contraband. He stepped forward, calm but firm. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about that equipment." Her voice cracked. This is neighborhood property enforcement." The agent didn't even blink. "That's federal property you're holding. Please put it down." The antenna clattered against the concrete. My neighbors audibly gasped. Karen's knees wobbled. She looked at me with sudden, desperate betrayal, as though I'd orchestrated a sting operation just to spite her. Which, in a way, I had, though not deliberately. She'd written her own trap, and now the FBI was parked in her driveway. I offered her a thin smile. "Karen, looks like you really did escalate." The agents ignored me, focused entirely on her. "Ma'am, we need to ask you some questions. Inside, please." They gestured toward her house. She hesitated, then shuffled toward her porch like a school kid caught cheating, robe still stained with dirt from her earlier tumble. Neighbors whispered. Phones recorded discreetly from behind hedges. And I, coffee cup still warm in hand, leaned against my porch rail with the satisfaction of someone watching karma arrive on schedule. This was just the beginning. Because if Karen thought ripping down an antenna was the peak of her crusade, she was about to learn how far escalation could really go once the federal government had her name on paper. And I hadn't even played my full hand yet. When the FBI led Karen inside her own house, I thought maybe the show would stop there. Maybe they'd scold her, confiscate the antenna parts, and vanish back into their black SUVs like ghosts. But that's not how Karen operates. If there's a hole in the ground, she will not only dig it deeper, she'll decorate it with a flag and call it victory. I stood on my porch long enough to watch the blinds twitch in her front windows and hear the muffled cadence of voices. Half the cul-de-sac had gathered by then. No one dared ask the agents questions. They just lingered on their lawns, whispering in conspiratorial tones. I didn't linger. I went inside, set my phone to record through the cracked window, and waited. Because I knew Karen wouldn't just fold. She never did. An hour later, the SUVs were still parked out front. The neighbors had dwindled into shadows, but I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through emails, pretending not to care. Then came the sound of a door flinging open, followed by Karen's voice, sharp, hysterical, slicing through the evening air. She was shouting something about rights, property, and harassment. I drifted closer to the window, mug in hand, expression calm. Through the glass, I saw her stomping down her driveway with 2 agents following, their faces neutral, their notepads filled. She looked directly across the street, at me, and jabbed a finger like she'd just identified a murder suspect. "He's the one," she screeched. "He's the one bringing all this trouble. He's spying on everyone. He's dangerous." One agent turned his gaze toward my house, assessing, not accusing, just cataloging. I smiled and raised my mug in a mock toast. Karen gasped like I'd spit in church. She grabbed the agent's arm, desperate. "You have to arrest him. I caught him with surveillance equipment. I saw it with my own eyes." The agent gently pried her hand off his sleeve. "Ma'am, please calm down. We're still gathering information." "Calm down," she shrilled. "He has more of those things. I guarantee it. He's probably got a whole bunker in his garage." That last word hit me like a gift-wrapped present, because the one place Karen had always eyed with suspicion was my garage. Every time the door rolled open, she lingered, hoping to catch a glimpse of secrets. Now she had practically begged the FBI to investigate. I leaned against the frame and let the scene unfold. The taller agent finally approached me. "Sir, may we ask you a few questions?" "Of course," I said, stepping outside, mug still warm in my hands. "Though I'd appreciate if you explained to my neighbor here that ripping equipment out of someone's yard isn't exactly community service." Karen sputtered, eyes wide. "Don't listen to him. He's clever, he twists words, he manipulates people." The agent ignored her. "We understand there was an antenna on your property. Can you explain its purpose?" I nodded. "Absolutely. It was a high-band receiver, used for meteorological data collection. Amateur radio licensed. All perfectly legal. My side project with a university research group. I can provide the permits and call logs if you'd like." The agent scribbled, unflinching. Karen, however, gasped again like I'd just confessed to treason. "University research?" she repeated, scoffing. "That's a cover. He's working with foreigners, with spies." I couldn't help but laugh. "Foreigners? Karen, last week you accused the neighbor's lawn service of being a cartel because they wore matching shirts." The shorter agent stepped between us. "We'll need to verify your statement, sir. May we look at the equipment?" I gestured toward my garage. "Be my guest. Just ignore the dust. I'm not as compulsively tidy as some around here." That earned a twitch from Karen's jaw. She followed us like a hound, muttering accusations under her breath. When the garage door rolled up, the agent's flashlights swept across shelves of tools, boxes, and the neatly stacked receiver equipment. Nothing illegal. Nothing menacing. Just technical gear wired into a workstation. The taller agent nodded, visibly satisfied. Karen, though, saw opportunity. She darted toward the workbench, yanked a coil of wire, and held it up like a smoking gun. "See? Wires. He's building something dangerous." The agent calmly removed it from her grip. "That's coaxial cable, ma'am. Standard." Her face flushed crimson. "You're protecting him. You're all in on it." The taller agent sighed. "Ma'am, unless you have additional evidence, we'll ask you to let us complete our work without interruption." She froze. Her eyes darted to the street, where neighbors were peeking from their porches again. Her authority was cracking in front of her audience, and Karen could never stand that. Desperation brewed into something reckless. She spun back to the agents, voice trembling with faux bravery. "Fine. If you won't stop him, I'll get evidence myself. I'll prove he's a threat." They warned her. Calm, professional. But Karen only heard defiance. That was her fuel. The agents eventually left with polite nods, promising to follow up. Their SUVs rolled away into the night. I expected Karen to retreat, lick her wounds, maybe regroup with the board. But no. By midnight, she was outside again, flashlight beam cutting across my yard. I caught her silhouette through the curtains. She was searching, desperate for anything incriminating. I almost let her dig her own grave in silence. Almost. Instead, I opened the door and let the beam hit me square in the chest. "Lose something?" I asked. She yelped, dropping the flashlight. I saw a raccoon. At midnight, in your robe, rummaging around my shed?" Her face twisted. "You think you're so clever. But you can't fool me. I'll find proof. I'll call the press if I have to." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Careful, Karen. The last people you called showed up in black SUVs. You really want more of that attention?" For once, she didn't have a comeback. She scurried back across the cul-de-sac, robe flapping, dignity in tatters. I knew then the story wasn't ending, it was evolving. The next morning confirmed it. My inbox overflowed with emails from neighbors forwarding Karen's latest HOA bulletin. She had accused me of running unauthorized intelligence operations from my garage, claiming her citizens' intervention had drawn federal interest. She styled herself as a hero protecting the community from surveillance. Half the neighborhood rolled their eyes. The other half whispered nervously, unsure whether to believe her paranoia. But the twist came 2 days later. The FBI returned, not to question me, but to collect more from Karen. Apparently, in her frenzy to gather proof, she had called multiple tip lines, filing reports that contradicted each other wildly. One claimed I was intercepting local emergency calls. Another insisted I was broadcasting coded messages to foreign entities, each more ridiculous than the last. They had to investigate, not because her claims were credible, but because her hysteria flagged enough keywords to trip actual protocols. And now, instead of me being under scrutiny, Karen had painted herself as the unstable source of noise. I watched from my porch again as they entered her house, not kindly this time, but firmly. Their questions echoed through the street. Karen's voice rose in shrieks, then sobs. When they finally escorted her out for further discussion downtown, the neighborhood went silent. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the relief was thick in the air, like everyone had just exhaled the same breath. By the time Karen came back from her little downtown interrogation, the neighborhood was buzzing like a hive that had just been kicked. Nobody had details, of course, because federal agents aren't in the business of gossiping with suburbanites. But that didn't stop the stories from spreading. One neighbor swore they saw Karen in handcuffs. Another claimed she'd been hauled away screaming about Russian satellite. By the third retelling, she was supposedly booked in jail for treason. The truth was far less cinematic. She was released after a few hours with a stern warning to stop filing false reports, but perception matters more than reality in our cul-de-sac. And Karen hated losing control of the narrative. When she finally appeared on her front porch 2 days later, she looked different. Not defeated. Karen never admitted defeat, but sharper, like a chess player who had studied her opponent's strategy overnight. Her hair was smoothed, her posture straighter, her robe replaced by a crisp blazer. The robe had made her look ridiculous. The blazer was meant to remind us she was president of the HOA, wielding a title like it was equivalent to mayor, sheriff, and Supreme Court justice rolled into one. Her first move was theatrical. She called an emergency board meeting and delivered invitations to each mailbox, written in language that suggested she was summoning us to a congressional hearing rather than a folding table conference in the community clubhouse. I, of course, was not invited. That alone made the neighbors curious enough to attend. Nothing attracts suburban attendance like the promise of scandal paired with the unspoken thrill of exclusion. That evening, cars lined the curb outside the clubhouse. I didn't bother showing up. Instead, I set my phone, perched discreetly on a friend's bag, to record the whole thing. When I played it back later, I nearly spit out my drink laughing. Karen stood at the front of the room like a general rallying troops, flanked by her 2 loyal officers, Pam, who lived for gossip, and Gerald, who still thought his landscaping degree qualified him to dictate everyone else's lawn height. Karen wasted no time. "Our neighborhood," she declared, voice booming through a dollar store microphone, "is under threat. Not from outsiders, but from within. One resident has installed suspicious devices, drawn federal scrutiny, and endangered our reputation. The FBI may have misinterpreted the situation, but we cannot. The safety and integrity of Oakwood Meadows depends on decisive action." There was a collective murmur. Some nodded, feeding off her drama. Others shifted uncomfortably. But then she unveiled her masterstroke, a resolution to amend HOA bylaws. The amendment proposed that any external fixtures, devices, or structures visible from the street be subject to immediate review and removal if deemed non-aesthetic or suspicious by a majority board vote. In short, she wanted power to tear down anything she didn't like, legally this time. Pam clapped first, Gerald second. A handful of residents followed suit, swept by the tide of authority. But not everyone. My friend Mark, who lived 2 doors down, raised his hand. "With all due respect, Karen, aren't you just writing a rule to justify what you already did illegally?" Karen's smile twitched, but she recovered. "Mark, community order sometimes requires strong leadership. Do you want federal agents constantly patrolling our streets? Because that's what happens when we allow rogue behavior." It was a clever pivot. Fear sells better than logic. The meeting ended with murmurs of half support, half doubt, and Karen announcing a vote would be held in 1 week. She left the podium with her chin high, certain she'd regained control. But here's the thing. Karen never understood long games. She lived for immediate wins, instant power grabs. I, on the other hand, thrived in shadows. The moment I heard her plan, I started working on mine. First, I circulated the recording. Nothing undercuts authority like hearing it unfiltered. When neighbors listened to her exaggerated tone, the paranoia was impossible to ignore. I didn't add commentary. I let Karen's own words do the work. By the next morning, the recording had gone viral in our community group chat. Reactions ranged from amused disbelief to outright anger. Second, I leveraged her weakest trait, arrogance. Karen couldn't resist an audience. So when the recording gained traction, she doubled down, insisting she had exclusive documents, proving my antenna was tied to federal surveillance. She promised to reveal them at the official vote. That meant she had to deliver something, anything that looked like proof, which is how she stumbled into my next trap. Because a week later, when the community gathered again in the clubhouse, Karen marched to the front with a manila folder bulging with papers. She slammed it onto the table like she'd unearthed the Pentagon Papers. "Here," she proclaimed, "are receipts, diagrams, and communications proving our neighbors' activities are not only unauthorized, but potentially criminal." Gasps filled the room. Even I leaned forward, curious what kind of fiction she'd cobbled together. She flipped open the folder with a flourish, and that's when her undoing became spectacular. The documents were a bizarre collage of printouts, screenshots from conspiracy websites, weather maps misinterpreted as signal patterns, even a page torn from a ham radio manual labeled encrypted spy codes in her handwriting. The piece de resistance? An Amazon receipt for coaxial cable she'd ordered herself, held up as evidence of my purchases. The room dissolved into a mix of chuckles and groans. Mark muttered, "This is your evidence?" Another neighbor asked if she'd glued it together from Reddit. Someone in the back laughed so loudly they had to leave the room. Karen's face darkened. "This is serious. These are signals. Codes. If you don't believe me, you're blind to the danger." But the spell had broken. The vote that followed wasn't even close. Her bylaw amendment was crushed 21-3. Pam and Gerald still clapped loyally, but the rest walked out shaking their heads. Karen remained at the podium, papers trembling in her hands, fury radiating off her like static. That night, she retaliated in the only way she could: escalation. Flyers appeared on every doorstep, accusing me of bribing the FBI, blackmailing neighbors, and manipulating the vote. The language was wild, the fonts mismatched, and one page included a crude sketch of my house labeled Enemy Outpost. It would have been funny if it weren't so unhinged. But here's the delicious twist. One of those flyers ended up in the hands of someone who wasn't laughing. The very same FBI agent who'd been assigned to monitor Karen's tips. He happened to be driving through when he spotted a neighbor tossing the flyer into the trash. Out of curiosity, or maybe professional obligation, he picked it up. Within 24 hours, Karen had earned herself a follow-up visit. The agents returned, less patient this time, and asked Karen where she obtained her evidence. Cornered, she blurted out that she had sources, which of course meant she had none. Her desperation painted her as unstable, and her flyers, laced with words like spying and enemy, triggered real concern at the Bureau. They didn't take her away, not yet, but they made it clear. Another stunt like this, and she'd cross a line she couldn't retreat from. Karen didn't take the crushing defeat of her bylaw amendment with quiet dignity. No, she came back like a storm that refuses to leave town, circling, gathering force, and promising devastation the second anyone lets their guard down. The vote had embarrassed her, publicly and undeniably, but embarrassment only sharpened her instincts for manipulation. Within days she shifted strategies. If the neighborhood wouldn't rally behind her authority alone, she would build an army. And the army she chose was the HOA board itself. On paper, the HOA board was supposed to be a group of volunteers handling routine things. Budgeting for lawn care, managing pool access, sending out newsletters reminding people to put away trash cans. In practice, under Karen's presidency, the board was a stage for her personal dramas. Most members didn't even attend meetings. They just let Karen handle everything, which meant she had a blank canvas to paint however she wanted. After the failed amendment, she started holding closed sessions, telling board members they were necessary to preserve the integrity of internal strategy. She pitched herself as a martyr, the one woman standing between our fragile community and the terrifying specter of internal surveillance threats. I had a mole, of course. My neighbor Clara, a retired teacher who could smell manipulation the way a bloodhound smells bacon, sat quietly on the board and reported everything back to me. Karen's playbook was simple. She hammered the same message until it became gospel. I was the threat. The neighborhood was vulnerable. The FBI was incompetent. Only Karen's leadership could protect us. She whispered about secret bylaws, federal overreach, and the erosion of suburban sovereignty. It was laughable. And yet, repetition works. Pam and Gerald were easy to keep loyal. Two other board members, older and conflict-averse, got worn down by her relentless monologues until they started nodding along just to end the meetings. With that, Karen controlled a voting majority. Her first move with her puppet board was to announce new compliance sweeps. These were surprise inspections of properties, carried out by Karen herself with clipboards, rulers, and cameras. She dragged Pam and Gerald with her like stormtroopers, marching from lawn to lawn, taking photos of flower beds, trash bins, and porch light. It was theater, pure and simple. The board had no authority to actually fine people without due process, but Karen banked on intimidation. And intimidation worked on some. People grumbled but trimmed their hedges anyway. They moved their garden gnomes out of sight. They rolled their eyes and complied. Then Karen crossed the line from ridiculous to dangerous. One morning I opened my mailbox and found a citation. Not a legal one, of course, just a piece of paper designed to look official, complete with a fake seal at the top that said, Oakwood Meadows Enforcement Division. The citation accused me of ongoing violations relating to external equipment and fined me $500, payable directly to the HOA treasurer. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. The audacity was astounding. Instead of tearing it up, I posted it in the neighborhood group chat with a caption. Did anyone else get a letter from Karen's fantasy police department? The replies flooded in. Turns out, a dozen neighbors had received similar notices for petty violations, one for mismatched curtains visible from the street, another for having a grill on the back deck, another for a mailbox that leaned 2 degrees off-center. People were furious. Some laughed it off. Others panicked. But the common thread was anger, not at me, but at Karen. That would have been enough to rattle most people. Not Karen. She doubled down. When residents protested at the next board meeting, she stood at the front, arms crossed, and declared, "If you aren't hiding anything, you shouldn't be afraid of inspections. These measures are necessary because some individuals in this community are working against our best interests. If you won't cooperate, maybe you're complicit." The word complicit dropped like a grenade. Murmurs rippled through the room. Neighbors who'd already been uneasy with Karen's crusade suddenly found themselves painted as co-conspirators if they didn't side with her. That kind of pressure can break weaker personalities. Some bowed to it. Others stewed in resentment. And the divide in our cul-de-sac widened into a chasm. Meanwhile, I watched the chaos unfold with a mix of irritation and glee. Irritation, because Karen's games were wasting my time. Glee, because every desperate move she made only widened the cracks in her own foundation. I knew it was only a matter of time before the FBI's patience snapped. But I didn't want to wait passively. So I gave them a little nudge. I forwarded copies of the fake citations to my attorney, who in turn forwarded them to a contact at the bureau. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The language Karen used was inflammatory enough. Accusations of espionage, fabricated enforcement divisions, demands for money. That wasn't just HOA drama, it was potentially fraud. And if there's one thing federal agencies don't overlook, it's fraud. The next escalation came faster than I expected. A week later, as Karen strutted around the cul-de-sac with Pam and Gerald in tow, clipboard in hand, the black SUVs returned. This time, they didn't park politely at the curb. They rolled right up onto Karen's driveway, doors opening in unison, agents stepping out with an authority that made the whole street freeze. Karen tried to spin it. "See?" she shouted, turning to us neighbors as if she'd orchestrated it. "They're here to assist us in rooting out danger." She marched toward the agents like a commander greeting reinforcements. But the lead agent didn't salute. He held up a folder. "Ma'am, we have questions regarding these documents distributed under your signature." He held up one of the citations. Karen's face twitched. "That's community enforcement," she insisted. "Within our rights." The agent's tone was flat. "Fraudulent documents with fabricated seals are not within your rights." The air went electric. Neighbors edged closer, whispering, recording on their phones. Pam looked like she might faint. Gerald tried to puff his chest but quickly shrank when the agent's eyes flicked his way. Karen wasn't one to admit defeat, though. She launched into a tirade about neighborhood security, about spies in our midst, about my antenna being a threat. She gestured wildly at my house, shouting, "He's the danger! Not me. I'm protecting this community." The agent let her finish, expression unreadable, then calmly said, "Ma'am, if you continue distributing fraudulent documents, you will face charges. Consider this a warning." It was a masterstroke, firm but restrained, leaving Karen dangling in front of her audience with no rescue line. She stammered, her voice cracking, then stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. The agents left soon after, their point made. The neighborhood erupted that night. Some people called for a recall vote on Karen's presidency. Others whispered about lawsuit. A few diehards still defended her, muttering about conspiracies and government overreach. But the tide had turned. The board was splintering. Pam avoided eye contact in public. Gerald mowed his lawn at night to dodge conversations. The two older members resigned entirely, leaving Karen with no majority. Karen's flyers were everywhere, taped to lampposts, slipped under doormats, shoved into mailboxes like contraband. Thick black marker, all caps, her handwriting manic and uneven. "Trust in no one. Spy among U.S. War for Oakwood Meadows." It was like living in a bad Cold War thriller, only the enemy agent was supposedly me, the guy whose worst crime that week had been forgetting to take the trash out on Tuesday. The neighborhood looked like it had been invaded by propaganda. By the third day, even the kids were joking about joining Karen's army and demanding rations of Capri Suns. But there was nothing funny about Karen's determination. She had lost the board, she had lost credibility, and she had lost face with the FBI. That should have been enough to make anyone retreat. Instead, it radicalized her. She stopped pretending this was about aesthetics or bylaws. Now it was survival, a self-declared battle for the soul of the neighborhood. Her first strike in this so-called war was sabotage. Small things at first, the kind that could be dismissed as coincidence. One morning I woke to find my mailbox door ripped off its hinge. Another day, my sprinkler system mysteriously flooded a patch of lawn after someone tampered with the valve. Packages went missing from my porch, though I knew from the angle of the security camera they hadn't been stolen by random thieves. It was Karen or someone she'd roped into her crusade. She thought death by 1,000 cuts would drive me out or make me slip up. Instead, it just made me calmer. Because every petty act of sabotage left a trail. And every trail I documented meticulously. Photos, timestamps, camera footage, notes. I wasn't just preparing to fight back. I was building a dossier. The neighbors noticed too. The more she lashed out, the more people whispered. Clara told me over coffee one morning that residents were afraid Karen would target them next if they didn't toe the line. Some started forming little alliances, checking each other's yards, exchanging screenshots of suspicious activity. The paranoia she'd sown was turning against her. She wanted an army, but what she created was a resistance. Of course, Karen didn't see it that way. She mistook silence for obedience. One evening, as I was grilling steaks, she marched across the street with Pam reluctantly trailing behind. Karen's hair was wild, her eyes glassy with righteous fury. She carried another clipboard, though this one was covered not with forms but with hand-drawn maps of the neighborhood. Each house was marked with symbols, X's, circles, arrows. It looked like a war plan sketched by a conspiracy theorist. She pointed at me, her voice carrying across the cul-de-sac. You think you're clever, hiding behind your gadgets and friends. But I know the truth. You've turned them against me with lies. You're poisoning this community. I flipped the steak, calm as ever. Karen, the only one poisoning this community is you. And you've done it with permanent marker. Pam winced, but Karen plowed forward. I won't let you destroy Oakwood Meadows. I'll expose you, even if it means going to the highest levels. You hear me? The highest levels. The timing was perfect, almost too perfect. Because at that exact moment, headlights swung into the cul-de-sac. Not the familiar black SUVs this time, but a white van with the unmistakable government plate. Out stepped two technicians in polos, carrying cases marked with the logo of a federal communications agency. Karen froze mid-rant, clipboard trembling in her hands. The techs didn't approach me, they approached her. Ma'am, one said, holding up identification, we need to discuss the calls you've been making to federal hotlines. Her face drained of color. Finally, someone who will listen. He's the one you want. She jabbed her pen at me again. But the technician shook his head. No, ma'am. We're here because your repeated reports have flagged multiple systems. We need to verify the source of your information. Neighbors had spilled out onto their lawns by now, drawn by the spectacle. I stood by my grill, arms folded, savoring every second. Karen stammered, flipping through her war maps like a magician looking for a missing card. The source is obvious. It's him. Just look at his garage. The second technician sighed. Ma'am, we've already inspected his equipment. Everything is licensed and above board. The issue is the volume and nature of your reports. We need to evaluate whether they're credible, or if they're creating unnecessary interference. Interference. That word landed like a hammer. Everyone knew what it meant. Karen wasn't exposing a spy. She was the problem. She was the static. But true to form, she didn't back down. She insisted they follow her inside her house to see her evidence. They agreed, likely just to get her out of the street, but before she went, she spun toward the crowd. You're all blind. You'll regret this when the truth comes out. The door slammed, and for the next hour muffled voices echoed from her house. By the time the technicians emerged, their expressions were grim, the way professionals look when they've just wasted valuable time. They loaded their cases back into the van, exchanged a look with me across the street, and drove off without another word. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. Neighbors lingered in small clusters, whispering. Pam slipped away without saying a word. Karen never reappeared that night. The next day, however, her retaliation reached a new level. My power went out. Not a neighborhood outage, just my house. When the utility company came to investigate, they discovered the main breaker had been manually tampered with. It wasn't a fluke. Someone had pried open the box. Someone who wanted me in the dark. I didn't call the police. I didn't need to. Instead, I uploaded the utility report, along with the photos of the damaged breaker, into the growing file I'd been curating. Then I sent a polite email to the FBI contact who'd already visited twice. The subject line was simple: escalation of neighbor interference, see attached. 2 days later, the black SUVs returned. This time they didn't knock on my door. They went straight to Karen's. The entire neighborhood gathered as if drawn by a magnet. We watched as the agents spoke with her on the porch, their voices calm but their stance firm. Karen gestured wildly, then tried to pull them inside, but they remained planted. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of back and forth, they escorted her to the SUV. Not cuffed, not arrested, but no longer in control either. As the vehicle rolled away with her inside, a strange feeling swept through Oakwood Meadows. Relief, yes, but also something like unity. For the first time in months, people talked openly on the street again. Kids played basketball in driveways without glancing nervously at Karen's windows. Someone even joked about holding a block party to celebrate. But I knew better than to think it was over. Karen wouldn't disappear quietly. She'd come back, angrier, more desperate, with some new angle. People like her don't stop until they're stopped completely. And sure enough, a week later, she was back. Only this time, she didn't come alone. She had lawyers. She had binders. She had a new strategy. Karen wasn't just waging a war anymore. She was preparing for a siege. And the next battle wouldn't just be fought in the cul-de-sac. It would be fought in court. Karen's return was less dramatic than expected. No midnight screaming in the cul-de-sac, no fresh flyers taped to mailboxes, but it was infinitely more dangerous. When she stepped out of a black sedan one crisp morning, she wasn't in her robe, or even her HOA blazer. She wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. At her side walked 2 lawyers, both stiff, both the kind who seemed allergic to small talk. The sight was enough to make 3 neighbors stop dead mid-dog walk. Even the Labrador seemed uneasy. Karen beamed like a celebrity returning from rehab. "Good morning, Oakwood Meadows," she sang, loud enough for half the street to hear. "Justice is coming." She didn't waste time. That afternoon, every household received a letter, not her usual marker-scrawled nonsense, but an official-looking document on thick paper. The heading read, Oakwood Meadows Homeowners Association vs. / my name. It claimed I had violated community standards, endangered residents, and provoked unnecessary federal intervention. Attached was a summons. Karen had filed a civil lawsuit against me in county court, leveraging HOA funds to pay for her shiny new legal team. The neighbors were split between disbelief and exasperation. Some thought it was another bluff. Others worried she'd drain the HOA budget in the process. As for me? I laughed. Out loud. Because Karen had just made the one move I'd been waiting for. She'd taken the conflict into a forum where her tantrums would be recorded, transcribed, and measured against actual law. I immediately called my attorney, who nearly choked on his coffee when I read him the complaint. "She's suing you for federal agents showing up? That's not how any of this works." His chuckle was reassuring. "Don't worry. We'll not only dismantle this, we'll expose her misuse of HOA funds." Still, I knew Karen. She wasn't aiming to win in court. She was aiming to weaponize the process, to drag me into hearings, drain my time and money, and restore her image by painting herself as a brave defender of the community. It was theater, same as always, only now she had a bigger stage. The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Karen treated the build-up like a campaign rally. She held informational sessions in her living room, inviting residents over for cookies and propaganda. Clara, my mole, attended one and reported back. Karen stood by a whiteboard covered in arrows and charts, explaining how my antenna was the tip of a surveillance iceberg. She insisted the FBI had been compromised, and that only through her lawsuit could the truth come out. She even promised to subpoena federal records, as if she had clearance to waltz into Langley and demand files. The neighbors humored her with polite nods, but Clara said she could see it in their eyes. Most of them weren't buying it. They were showing up for the cookies. When the hearing day arrived, the courthouse hallway felt like a high school reunion. Half the neighborhood had come to watch. Karen swept and flanked by her lawyers, her hair sprayed into helmet perfection, lips curled in a satisfied smirk. I showed up in a simple suit, hands in my pockets, calm as ever. The contrast was obvious. She wanted to look like a crusader. I wanted to look like a guy inconvenienced by nonsense. Inside the courtroom, the judge, a no-nonsense woman with the patience of a saint, listened as Karen's lead attorney launched into a monologue. He claimed I had installed unauthorized telecommunications equipment, that I had attracted federal surveillance, and that I had destabilized the peace and order of Oakwood Meadows. He even cited the fraudulent citations Karen had distributed, holding them up as evidence. That backfired spectacularly. The judge interrupted, eyebrows raised. "Did you just submit documents bearing a fabricated seal as evidence?" The attorney stammered. Karen jumped in, insisting they were community-issued notices, but the judge wasn't fooled. She made a note in the file, her expression unreadable. When my attorney spoke, he was concise. He explained the antenna's purpose, provided licensing paperwork, and presented the utility report showing Karen's tampering with my breaker box. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He simply laid out facts. The contrast was devastating. Karen couldn't resist interrupting. She leapt from her seat mid-testimony, shouting, "He's lying. He's manipulating everyone, even you, Your Honor." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Sit down, ma'am, or I will hold you in contempt." The courtroom gasped. Karen sat, trembling, but not silent. She muttered under her breath loud enough for the first row to hear, rambling about corruption and spies. The hearing ended without a ruling, just scheduling for future motions. But the damage was done. The transcript would show Karen's outbursts, her fabricated evidence, her unraveling composure. Outside, the neighbors who had come out of curiosity now whispered in shock. One muttered, "She's lost it." Another said, "This is going to bankrupt the HOA." Even Pam looked shaken, her loyalty faltering under the weight of Karen's spectacle. But Karen, ever delusional, treated it as victory. She stood on the courthouse steps, cameras rolling from local reporters she had tipped off, and declared, "We will not be silenced. This is just the beginning." The next escalation came faster than I expected. Days later, I received notice that Karen had subpoenaed me, not just for HOA records, but for my personal communications. She wanted my emails, my texts, even my work documents. Her lawyers had gone full scorched earth, hoping to drown me in paperwork. It would have been intimidating, if I didn't already know the FBI was watching. See, every frivolous motion Karen filed, every baseless accusation she made, was logged. And my quiet cooperation, my calm compliance, only sharpened the contrast. The Bureau had grown tired of her antics. I knew because one evening, as I pulled into my driveway, an agent I'd seen before was waiting by his SUV. "Off the record," he said, leaning against the hood. "Keep documenting everything. She's crossing lines faster than we can warn her. It's only a matter of time before this shifts from civil nonsense to criminal." His tone was steady, but his eyes betrayed frustration. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was wasting federal resources, filing false claims, and potentially defrauding her own neighbors. They couldn't ignore that forever. Meanwhile, Karen's siege intensified. She installed cameras around her house, pointing them not inward but outward, aimed at every angle of the cul-de-sac. She patrolled at night with a flashlight, muttering into a tape recorder. She even spray-painted "We see you" on the curb outside my driveway one morning, thinking it would intimidate me. I power-washed it off before lunch and waved at her as if she'd delivered free entertainment. The neighbors weren't as amused. Some started organizing a recall petition, fed up with their HOA dues funding Karen's war chest. Others quietly met at my house, asking if I could do something. I told them the truth. Karen was doing it all to herself. All we had to do was keep watching. And then came the tipping point. At the second hearing, Karen's attorney tried again to submit her evidence. This time, it included doctored photos, images of my garage digitally altered to show glowing red lights, wires snaking into the ground. The day Karen's world collapsed started like any other suburban Saturday. The sky was clear, the lawns were being mowed, and kids were riding bikes in lazy circles around the cul-de-sac. From my porch, it looked almost normal. But the undercurrent wasn't normal at all. By then, the HOA was fractured, the lawsuit had become a circus, and Karen had crossed so many lines she was practically drawing new ones in the sand just to step over them. For the first time in months, I had no idea what her next move would be. That alone was unsettling. She had gone quiet after her courtroom outburst, which made everyone nervous. A quiet Karen was never a defeated Karen, she was a Karen scheming. The first sign of her grand finale came mid-morning. A delivery truck pulled up to her driveway, and out came boxes. Big ones, heavy, marked with electronics warnings. Karen stood there directing the movers, clipboard in hand, wearing a satisfied smirk like she was finally putting the last piece of a puzzle in place. Neighbors whispered from porches. What could she possibly be ordering now? I didn't have to wonder long. By afternoon, strange noises were coming from inside her garage, whirs, beeps, metallic thuds. Karen had built herself a command center. When she emerged hours later, sweat on her brow, she announced to anyone within earshot that Oakwood Meadows was now under community surveillance. She waved a walkie-talkie and declared, "We will no longer live under the shadow of spies. From this moment, we take back control." Pam clapped weakly. Gerald gave a thumbs up. The rest of the neighborhood exchanged looks that ranged from exhausted to terrified. Everyone knew she had finally tipped into something unhinged. That night, the first broadcast came. At exactly 9 p.m., every house received a robocall. A distorted voice, Karen's voice run through some cheap filter, warned that foreign interference has penetrated Oakwood Meadows and that residents should remain vigilant. The call ended with a chilling line. "If you see something, say something, or you will be considered complicit." Phones rang off the hook. Children cried. People panicked. My own voicemail filled with frantic messages from neighbors asking what to do. I told them the truth. Stay calm. Document everything. Help is already on its way. Because I knew it was. The FBI had been monitoring Karen for weeks. Her flyers, her fake citations, her courtroom lies, they had all been logged. My dossier of evidence was just icing on the cake. The Bureau didn't move fast because they didn't have to. Karen was digging the hole deeper with every stunt. And tonight, she hit bedrock. The second broadcast came at midnight. This time, it wasn't a phone call. It was loudspeakers. Karen had rigged speakers outside her house and was blasting warnings across the cul-de-sac. "The traitor lives among you," she screamed, her voice amplified and warbled. "He brought federal spies to our door. He must be removed." Spotlights lit up, sweeping across driveways like prison searchlights. They landed on my house and stayed there. Neighbors peeked from curtains, horrified. For the first time, I saw genuine fear on their faces. Not fear of me, but of her. I stepped onto my porch, arms folded, and stared straight into the beam. Karen's silhouette appeared in her upstairs window, triumphant, waving her walkie-talkie like a sword. "You can't hide anymore," she shrieked into the night. And that's when the SUVs came. 3 of them, engines low, tires crunching gravel. They didn't creep in this time. They roared into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing, blocking every exit. Doors flung open, and agents poured out, calm, precise, deliberate. The neighborhood erupted in whispers, camera phones clicking on instinct. Karen's spotlight swung wildly, then cut off. Her voice vanished from the speakers. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then came a crash, her front door slamming open as she stumbled onto the porch, hair disheveled, walkie-talkie still clutched. "You can't take me," she screamed. "This is my community. My rules. I have evidence, you're all blind sheep." The lead agent stepped forward, badge gleaming in the light. "Ma'am, step away from the equipment. You are under investigation for obstruction, harassment, and distribution of fraudulent documents. Do not resist." Karen laughed, a high, unhinged cackle that made even Pam flinch. "Resist? I lead. These people need me. Without me, this neighborhood will fall." She pointed at me across the street. "He's the spy. He's the danger. Arrest him." The agent didn't even look at me. His gaze stayed locked on her. "Last warning, ma'am. Step down." She didn't. She darted back inside. Agents followed. The whole street froze, listening. There were shouts, a crash, the sound of something metallic clattering across tile. Then silence again. Minutes later, they emerged with Karen in their grip. Not cuffed, not dragged, but firmly escorted. Her eyes were wide, wild, scanning the crowd. "You'll regret this," she screamed. "The truth will come out. You're all part of it." No one responded. Not a single neighbor stepped forward. The spell had broken. The army she thought she commanded had dissolved into a crowd of weary spectators. Pam wept quietly into her hands. Gerald turned away, ashamed. The rest just watched as the SUVs swallowed her whole. When the engines faded into the distance, the cul-de-sac exhaled. People gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones, some relieved, some still shaken. Kids hugged their parents. Dogs barked as if sensing the shift in energy. I stayed on my porch, silent, sipping coffee I didn't need. Because I knew this wasn't victory for me. It wasn't even really about me. It was about Karen, and the way her hunger for control had devoured her from the inside. In the days that followed, the HOA scrambled. Emergency meetings were held. Karen was formally removed from the presidency. Pam resigned, muttering something about needing peace. Gerald disappeared into his backyard, mowing grass at odd hours as though hiding from his own reflection. The rest of us began the slow process of mending fences, literally and figuratively. The FBI never came back to question me. They didn't need to. I'd played my part by staying calm, by documenting, by letting Karen escalate herself into oblivion. The agent sent me a polite note thanking me for my cooperation and reminding me to keep records, just in case. But I knew it was over. One evening, Clara joined me on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. She nodded toward Karen's darkened house, empty now, blinds drawn. "You think she'll come back?" I shrugged. "People like her always try. But once the spotlight turns on them, it's never the same." Clara sipped her tea. "Well, if she does, at least now we know what to expect." And that was the truth. Karen had torn down my antenna, tried to tear down my reputation, and in the end tore down herself instead. All I had to do was stand firm, let her tantrums echo, and wait for the sound of federal engines rolling into her driveway. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come with fireworks or cheers. Sometimes it comes with black SUVs at dusk, neighbors peeking from windows, and the quiet collapse of a tyrant who thought she could rule a cul-de-sac like an empire.